What is the price of a single word? For one waitress, the word no was the most expensive she could ever utter. When she refused to pour another drink for a staggering, grief-stricken billionaire, she lost her job, her security, and her only hope of saving her dying brother. She thought her life was over. But the next day, a black car arrived at her door with an envelope. Inside was no apology, no job offer, just a blank check signed by the man who had ruined her. A test, a temptation, a silent, terrifying question. How much is your soul worth? This isn't a story about money. It's a story about what money can't buy. The air in the Apex bar, perched on the 60th floor of the Omni Tower in downtown Chicago, was thick with the scent of money. It was a cocktail of expensive perfume-aged leather and the faint citrusy tang of artisanal gin. For Clara Evans, it was the smell of survival. Every perfectly polished glass, every deferential nod, every flawlessly recited list of single malt scotches was a small step towards the only thing that mattered, the $250,000 she needed for her little brother's surgery. Leo was 14, with a laugh that could fill a stadium and a heart that was failing him with terrifying speed. The experimental treatment at the Mayo Clinic was his only chance, and the price tag was as astronomical as the view from the Apex's panoramic windows. So Clara worked. She worked double shifts, ignored the ache in her feet that had become a permanent resident, and smiled at men whose watches cost more than her entire life. Tonight, the storm came to her. His name, she would learn later, was Alistair Blackwood, but when he stumbled into the bar, he was just a man drowning in a bespoke suit, a Tom Ford masterpiece, rumpled and stained with what looked like whiskey. His silver hair, usually a testament to distinguished power, was in disarray. His eyes, a piercing North Atlantic blue, were clouded with a potent mix of grief and alcohol. He wasn't just drunk. He was possessed by a sorrow so vast it seemed to suck the oxygen from his corner of the room. He'd already been at his private table for 3 hours, attended to by another waitress, who was now pale and shaken. Clara's manager, a man named Henderson, whose spine was made of jelly, intercepted her as she delivered a tray of champagne flutes. "Evans," he hissed, his eyes darting towards the billionaire. "You're up. Jessica can't handle him." "What's the situation?" Clara asked, her voice low. "The situation is that's Alistair Blackwood. His credit line is infinite, and his temper is legendary. He keeps ordering Macallan 25. Just pour smile and don't make eye contact." Clara steeled herself. She'd dealt with drunks before. Wealthy ones, sad ones, angry ones. It was part of the job. She approached the table with a fresh bottle and a clean glass on a silver tray. The table was a disaster zone, a half-eaten steak, an overturned glass, and a Patek Philippe watch lying carelessly beside a puddle of liquor. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice calm and even. "Another Macallan." He didn't look at her. He stared out the window at the river of lights that was Chicago at night. "Don't ask," he slurred, his voice a low growl. "Just pour." She placed the clean glass in front of him. His hand trembled as he reached for it, knocking it over. It rolled off the table and shattered on the marble floor. He flinched, not at the sound of the glass, but as if from a phantom blow. "Leave it," he mumbled, pushing his old half-full glass forward. "Just fill this one." Clara looked at his eyes, really looked. They were bloodshot, the pupils dilated. His movements were clumsy, his speech thick. He was long past the point of legal service. Pouring him another drink wasn't just against the rules of the Illinois Liquor Control Commission. It was a betrayal of a fundamental human duty. You don't hand a loaded gun to a man intent on self-destruction. Her mind flashed to Leo, to the beeping machines, and the pale look on his face. She needed this job. She needed the tips. A man like Blackwood could tip $1,000 without thinking twice. That was a week's rent. That was a consultation fee. But then she thought about the call she'd dread getting one day. The call from the hospital about Leo. And she thought about the call some other family might get tonight. A call about a man in a Maybach running a red light. She placed her hand gently on the bottle. "Sir," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I'm sorry, but I can't serve you another drink." The transformation was instantaneous. The fog of grief in his eyes sharpened into a blade of pure fury. He turned his head slowly, his gaze finally locking onto hers. It was like being pinned by a searchlight. "What did you just say to me?" He whispered the word laced with disbelief and menace. "I said I cannot serve you any more alcohol, sir. I would be happy to get you some coffee or a bottle of water. I can have a car called for you." He let out a short, incredulous laugh that was more of a bark. "A car? Do you have any idea who I am? I know you're a guest at our establishment, sir, and my responsibility is to ensure your safety." "Your responsibility," he sneered, leaning forward, "is to do what I tell you to do. Pour the drink." Behind her, Clara could feel Henderson vibrating with anxiety. She could almost hear him mentally shredding her employment contract. But the image of Leo's face was burned into her mind. "No, sir. I'm sorry." He slammed his fist on the table. The silverware jumped. The water glass wobbled. Across the bar, conversations faltered. "You think you're better than me?" he roared, his voice cracking. "You a little girl, playing dress-up, pouring drinks for your betters. You stand there in your cheap uniform, and you dare to judge me." Clara stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs. "This isn't about judgment, Mr. Blackwood. This is about—" "I don't give a damn what it's about," he shouted, trying to stand but stumbling back into his chair. "Get me your manager. Get me the man who owns this pathetic excuse for a hotel. I'll have your job. I'll have this whole damn building." Henderson scurried over his face, a mask of frantic apology. "Mr. Blackwood, my deepest apologies. A misunderstanding, I assure you. Clara, what are you doing? Serve the man." Clara looked from her manager's terrified face to the billionaire's ravaged one. The $1,000 tip, the rent, the surgery, it all swirled in a dizzying vortex. But at the center of it was a single, unshakable point of stillness, a sense of right and wrong. She looked directly at Alistair Blackwood, her gaze unwavering. No. That one word sealed her fate. Henderson fired her on the spot, his voice a choked whisper as Blackwood watched with grim satisfaction. He ordered her to clear out her locker and leave through the service exit immediately. As she walked away from the table, a single tear of pure hot fury tracing a path down her cheek. She heard Alistair Blackwood's voice, low and victorious, call out to Henderson. "Now, where's that drink?" Clara didn't wait to hear the answer. She fled the sound of a whiskey bottle clinking against a glass, chasing her all the way down to the street, where the cold Chicago wind felt like a slap in the face. She had lost. She had stood for something, and in return she had lost everything. The next morning, Clara's apartment felt like a tomb. The grey, unforgiving light of a Chicago dawn seeped through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Each one felt like a tiny ghost of her shattered hopes. She hadn't slept. For hours, she had sat on her worn-out sofa, alternating between numb disbelief and waves of gut-wrenching panic. The numbers screamed in her head. Rent was due in a week. The pharmacy had called yesterday. Leo's prescription refills were ready, and they weren't cheap. The savings account, once a small hill of carefully hoarded cash, was now a barren plain. Losing her job at the Apex wasn't just a setback, it was a catastrophic failure. The tips alone had been the lifeblood of her plan. No other waitressing gig in the city would come close. She made a list, a desperate ritual to impose order on the chaos. Call temp agencies, check online job boards, sell her grandmother's locket. The options were bleak, each one a step further away from the $250,000 goal that now seemed like a cruel fantasy. Around 10 a.m., a sound from the street below broke her trance. It wasn't the usual city cacophony of sirens and construction. It was the purr of a high-performance engine, a low, predatory rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Clara peeked through the blinds. Parked in front of her modest 3-story apartment building was a car that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of polished obsidian. A Maybach S-Class, sleek and silent, its tinted windows revealing nothing. It was so out of place in her working-class neighborhood that it might as well have been a spaceship. A man in a dark suit with the build of a retired Secret Service agent and an earpiece nestled in his ear emerged from the driver's side. He didn't look at the building's directory. He walked directly to the front entrance and pressed the buzzer for apartment 2B. Her apartment. Clara's heart seized. Were they here to threaten her? To serve her with some kind of lawsuit for embarrassing a billionaire? Her hand trembled as she pressed the intercom button. "Hello, Clara Evans." The voice was deep, professional, and devoid of emotion. "Who is this?" "I have a delivery for you from Mr. Alistair Blackwood." The name hit her like a punch. A cold dread mingled with a spark of furious curiosity washed over her. "I'm not accepting anything from him." "Ms. Evans," the voice said patiently. "My instructions are to deliver this envelope to you personally. I can wait here all day. I assure you it will be less conspicuous for both of us if you simply accept it." He was right. Neighbors were already starting to peek out of their windows, drawn by the automotive anomaly on their street. With a sigh of resignation, Clara buzzed him in. She met him at her apartment door, which she opened only a few inches, the security chain still in place. The man was even more imposing up close. He looked her up and down, his expression unreadable, and extended a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was heavy, made from expensive card stock. Her name was written on the front in elegant, cursive script. She took it. The man gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Good day, Miss Evans." Without another word, he turned, walked down the stairs, and a minute later the Maybach purred back to life and glided away, leaving the street feeling mundane and drab once more. Clara locked the door, her back pressed against it, the envelope clutched in her hand. It felt both hot and cold, a dangerous artifact from another world. What was it? A cease and desist letter. A settlement for wrongful termination, padded with a non-disclosure agreement to buy her silence. Her fingers shook as she tore open the seal. Inside there was no letter, no explanation, no gloating message or legal threat. There was only a check. It was a personal check drawn from a private bank she'd never heard of, Blackwood Financial Trust. In the top left corner was the name Alistair V. Blackwood, and an address in a part of the city she only knew from magazines. The pay to the order of line was filled out in the same cursive script as the envelope Clara Evans. The signature on the bottom right was a bold, authoritative scrawl, but the amount box, the line where the numbers were supposed to be, was empty, and below it on the line where the amount was to be written in words was also blank. A blank check. Clara sank onto her sofa, her legs giving way. She stared at it, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. It was an absurdity, a cruel joke, a test. The implications crashed down on her one by one. She could write any number. Any number. She could write $5,000 to cover her rent and bills for the next few months. She could write $50,000 and not have to worry for a year. She could write $250,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering. The exact amount she needed for Leo. The key to his future, his life lying on a piece of paper in her trembling hands. She could take it to the bank, deposit it, and call the Mayo Clinic today. It would all be over. Her struggle, her fear, the constant grinding weight on her soul. This was what he was doing. He wasn't apologizing. He was demonstrating his power. He was saying, "You tried to take something from me, my right to drink myself into oblivion. So I'll take something from you, your integrity. I'll prove that everyone has a price, even you." She felt a wave of nausea. To accept it would be to admit he was right, that her stand in the bar was a foolish, naive gesture, that her principles were just a luxury she couldn't afford. It would mean that in the end, his money had won. He would have successfully bought her body and soul, reducing her righteous no to a mere negotiating tactic. But Leo. She looked at the photo on her mantelpiece. A smiling boy with a baseball cap on, backward his arm slung around her shoulders. His life was in her hands. Was her pride, her integrity worth more than his next birthday? What kind of sister would she be if she let him die for a principle? The check was a poison apple, a Faustian bargain offered not by a demon in the night, but by a chauffeur in broad daylight. For an hour she paced her small living room, the check in her hand. It was the heaviest thing she had ever held. Finally she stopped. Her breathing steadied. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She couldn't do it. She couldn't cash it. If she did, she would save Leo's life, but lose the very part of herself she hoped he would one day admire. She would teach him that when things get hard, you sell your soul. No, there had to be another way. She put the check back in its envelope. She walked to her laptop and opened a web browser. She typed Blackwood Industries Headquarters, Chicago. The address that appeared was one of the city's most iconic skyscrapers. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't over. She wasn't going to cash the check. She was going to return it. She was going to walk into the lion's den and hand it back to the man who thought he could buy her. She was going to look him in his sober eyes and give him her answer one more time. The Blackwood Tower wasn't just a building. It was a statement. A spear of smoked glass and obsidian steel that pierced the Chicago skyline. It was designed to intimidate, to project an aura of unassailable power. As Clara stood before it, clutching the envelope in her coat pocket, she felt as small and insignificant as an ant at the base of a mountain. The $20 she'd spent on a cab ride felt like a reckless extravagance. But the thought of taking the L train and arriving flustered and windswept was unthinkable. She needed every ounce of composure she could muster. The lobby was a cathedral of corporate ambition. Soaring ceilings, floors of polished Italian marble that reflected the frantic energy of the city outside, and a quiet, reverent hush that was more intimidating than any noise. A massive, abstract sculpture of bronze and steel, which probably had a name like Synergy or Ascension, dominated the center of the space. Men and women in impeccably tailored suits glided past her, their faces set with purpose. They all looked like they belonged. Clara, in her best and only blazer and sensible shoes, felt like an imposter. She approached the main reception desk, a monolith of black granite, helmed by a woman with sharp, angular features and a headset that seemed surgically attached. "Good morning," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm here to see Mr. Alistair Blackwood." The receptionist didn't even look up from her screen. "Is he expecting you?" "No," Clara admitted. "But it's a personal matter, a delivery." The woman's eyes finally flicked up, giving Clara a swift, dismissive appraisal. "Mr. Blackwood does not accept unscheduled appointments or deliveries. You can leave it with me. I was instructed to deliver it to him personally," Clara insisted, channeling the phantom authority of the man in the Maybach. "He'll want to see me." That gave the receptionist a moment's pause. The possibility, however remote, that this ordinary-looking woman might have a genuine personal connection to the demigod on the top floor was enough to make her hesitate. She typed something into her keyboard. "Your name, Clara Evans." The name clearly meant nothing to her. With a sigh that conveyed immense personal suffering, the receptionist spoke into her headset. "Ms. Davenport, I have a Clara Evans in the lobby for Mr. Blackwood. She claims it's a personal delivery." "Yes, I'll send her up." She slid a temporary access card across the granite. "Penthouse floor, the elevator bank to your right." The elevator ride was a silent, stomach-lurching ascent. With each floor, the pressure in Clara's ears grew a physical manifestation of the social and financial altitude she was climbing. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into a reception area that was larger than her entire apartment. The view was breathtaking, a 360-degree panorama of the city and the vast blue expanse of Lake Michigan. A woman in her late 50s with salt and pepper hair pulled into a severe chignon, and an air of formidable competence rose from behind a large mahogany desk. This had to be Ms. Davenport. "Ms. Evans," she said, her voice crisp. "I'm Elizabeth Davenport, Mr. Blackwood's executive assistant. You can give the package to me." Clara shook her head, clutching the envelope in her pocket. "I need to see him." Ms. Davenport's smile was thin and sharp. "I can assure you that's not possible. Mr. Blackwood's schedule is accounted for, down to the minute, for the next 3 months. Whatever your business is, it ends with me." "This is from last night," Clara said, her voice dropping. "From the Apex bar." A flicker of understanding and something akin to disdain crossed Ms. Davenport's face. She knew. Of course she knew. She was probably the one who managed the fallout from his episodes. "I see," she said coolly. "In that case, I'm certain Mr. Blackwood would prefer I handle it." "With all due respect, Ms. Davenport," Clara said, her resolve hardening. "I'm not leaving until I give this back to him myself." They were at an impasse. A silent battle of wills waged in the rarefied air of the penthouse. Before Ms. Davenport could deliver a final crushing refusal, a voice boomed from an adjacent office, the door of which was slightly ajar. "Elizabeth, what's going on out there? Is that the quarterly report from the Asian markets?" Alistair Blackwood emerged holding a tablet. He was a different man entirely. The bespoke suit was perfect. His silver hair was immaculate, and his blue eyes were clear, sharp, and utterly cold. He looked powerful, rested, and in complete control. There was no trace of the broken, slurring mess from the night before. He glanced at Clara, and for a heart-stopping second, she saw no recognition in his eyes whatsoever. He had no idea who she was. "Mr. Blackwood," Ms. Davenport said smoothly. "This young woman insisted on seeing you. I was just explaining that you're—" "Evans," Clara said, her voice cutting through the assistant's excuse. "My name is Clara Evans. From last night." Alistair Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly. A vague memory seemed to be stirring. He looked at her face, then at the determined set of her jaw. A faint glimmer of recognition dawned, followed by a wave of irritation. He remembered the defiance, not the details. "Ah, the waitress," he said the words, dripping with condescension. He tossed the tablet onto his assistant's desk. "So the check arrived. I assume you're here for some sort of negotiation. You think you can shake me down for more?" The accusation was so insulting, so far from the truth, that it extinguished the last of Clara's fear, replacing it with a clean, cold anger. "No, Mr. Blackwood, she said, pulling the envelope from her pocket and placing it firmly on the polished surface of Ms. Davenport's desk. "I'm here to return it." He stared at the envelope, then back at her, genuinely perplexed. This was a scenario that had clearly never occurred to him. "Return it? Why?" "Because my integrity isn't for sale," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even herself. "Not for any price you could possibly write on that piece of paper." He picked up the envelope, his brow furrowed. He seemed to be reassessing her, seeing her for the first time, not as an obstacle or a nuisance, but as an anomaly. "Every person has a price," he said, more to himself than to her. It was the mantra of his world. "Then you've spent your life dealing with the wrong people," Clara retorted. "You tried to use your money to humiliate me to prove a point. You think because you're rich, you can behave however you want without consequences. You think you can buy your way out of anything, even your own decency." Miss Davenport gasped audibly, but Alistair raised a hand to silence her. He was listening now, his full attention fixed on Clara. "I refused to serve you last night, not to judge you," Clara continued, her voice trembling slightly with the force of her conviction. "But because you were a man in pain and pouring more poison into your system was wrong. It was a human decision, not a financial one. Something you clearly don't understand." She straightened her shoulders. "So here is your check. I don't want your money. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to know that you failed. You didn't break me." With that, she turned on her heel and walked towards the elevator, her head held high. She didn't look back. She pressed the button, and as she waited for the doors to open, the silence from the office behind her was absolute. Just before the doors slid shut, she risked a glance. Miss Davenport was frozen, staring at her with a mixture of shock and newfound respect. And Alistair Blackwood was standing by the desk, the blank check in his hand, his cold corporate mask finally cracked. He wasn't looking at her with anger or irritation. He was looking at her with a stunning, unsettling expression of pure, unadulterated astonishment. For a long time after the elevator doors closed, Alistair Blackwood remained motionless, the check held loosely in his hand. The paper, a symbol of his infinite power to shape the world to his will, suddenly felt foreign, useless. Elizabeth Davenport, who had seen him handle hostile takeovers, international incidents, and personal tragedies with the same icy composure, watched him with cautious curiosity. She had never seen him look so thoroughly thwarted. "Sir," she finally ventured, "shall I have security escort her from the building?" Alistair didn't answer immediately. He ran his thumb over the blank line on the check. "How much is your soul worth?" He had asked the question, and the waitress Clara Evans had thrown it back in his face. "You've spent your life dealing with the wrong people." The words echoed in the silent office. Was that true? He had built an empire on the principle that loyalty, allegiance, and action could all be bought and sold. He moved markets and toppled competitors by finding every person's price. It was the fundamental law of his universe. And this young woman with nothing to her name but a worn-out blazer and a stubborn glare had just defied that law. "No," he said. Finally, his voice quiet. "That won't be necessary." He walked back into his office and sat down heavily in the leather chair behind his sprawling desk. He placed the check in the center of the desk, staring at it as if it were a coded message he couldn't decipher. His memory of the previous night was a foggy, disjointed mess, a slideshow of shame and anger. He remembered the raw, gnawing grief. It was the anniversary after all, the day the world had ended, the day he'd lost his wife, Eleanor, and their 9-year-old daughter, Lily, the day a drunk driver had crossed the median and turned his world to ash. Every year on that date, he allowed himself to crumble. He would lock himself away and drink until the memories were blurred and the pain was a dull, manageable roar. Usually he did this in the solitude of his penthouse. But this year, the silence of the apartment was too loud, too full of ghosts. He'd gone to the bar, seeking the anesthesia of noise and strangers. He remembered demanding another drink. He remembered being refused. He remembered the flash of indignant fury. He had felt judged, and in his grief-addled state he had lashed out with the only weapon he had left, his wealth. The blank check had been an act of pure, arrogant cruelty, a way to reassert his dominance, a way to prove that even a person's principles were just another commodity. And he had failed, spectacularly. He buzzed his intercom. "Elizabeth, get Gideon in here." "Yes, Mr. Blackwood." Minutes later, a man entered the office. Gideon Vance was the head of Blackwood's personal security and corporate intelligence. A former Mossad agent, he was a quiet, precise man in his 40s, with watchful eyes that missed nothing. He was Alistair's fixer, his shadow the man who handled the problems that couldn't be solved with money alone. "Sir," Gideon said, his voice a low baritone. Alistair gestured to the chair opposite him. He slid the check across the desk. Gideon glanced at it, but showed no reaction. "A woman was just here," Alistair began. "Her name is Clara Evans. She was a waitress at the Apex bar at the Omni Tower. I had her fired last night." "I'm aware, sir. Mr. Henderson, the manager, called Miss Davenport this morning to confirm the termination and to express his continued loyalty." Alistair waved a dismissive hand. "Forget Henderson. I want to know about her. Clara Evans. I want to know everything. Where she lives, where she's from, who her family is. I want to know why she needs money so badly that she'd work in a place like that. But not so badly that she'd cash this." He tapped the check. "I want to know what she was protecting." Gideon nodded, his expression unchanging. "Discreetly?" "Of course, discreetly," Alistair snapped. Then his voice softened. "Just find out. I want the file on my desk by end of day." "It will be done," Gideon said. He stood, gave a slight nod, and left as silently as he had arrived. For the rest of the day, Alistair was distracted. He went through the motions of his meetings, his mind replaying the scene with Clara Evans, her unwavering gaze, the tremor of conviction in her voice. It was a human decision, not a financial one. The phrase was an indictment of his entire existence. At precisely 4:45 p.m., Gideon returned. He placed a thin grey folder on Alistair's desk. There was no fanfare, no preamble. "The subject's financials were difficult to penetrate without raising flags," Gideon said. "But a preliminary social and public records background check was illuminating." Alistair opened the folder, The first page was a simple fact sheet. Name: Clara Marie Evans. Age: 24. Address: 2145 N. Rockwell, St. Apt, 2B. Chicago. Ill occupation: unemployed. Formerly waitress. The Apex Bar known associates. Leo Evans. Brother, age 14. He flipped the page. It was a printout of a social media page, a fundraising site, GoFundMe. The title of the page was A Heart for Leo. Alistair's breath caught in his throat. The page featured a picture of a smiling, vibrant boy, the same boy from the photo in Clara's apartment, he now realized, and a detailed, heart-wrenching account of his condition, dilated cardiomyopathy, a progressive disease of the heart muscle. Without a transplant or a highly experimental stem cell therapy, his prognosis was grim. The fundraising goal was listed at the top, $250,000. Below it, the amount raised so far was pitiful $7,450. Alistair read through the updates Clara had posted over the months. Cheerful, optimistic posts about Leo's bravery, interspersed with increasingly desperate pleas for donations. He saw links to bake sales, car washes, pleas for local news coverage. He saw the sheer grinding effort of a person trying to move a mountain with a teaspoon. The report continued. It detailed the mounting medical bills, the cost of the specialized medication, the multiple hospital stays. It painted a picture not of a grifter or an opportunist, but of a young woman fighting a desperate losing battle for her brother's life. Then he reached the last page of the report. It was a copy of a police incident report from 5 years ago. A minor car accident. Clara Evans had been T-boned by a driver who ran a stop sign. The other driver had been arrested at the scene. The charge: driving under the influence. Clara had escaped with minor injuries, but the report noted she was deeply shaken. It all clicked into place. The pieces of the puzzle assembled themselves with a sickening, brutal clarity. She hadn't refused to serve him because of some abstract, self-righteous principle. She had looked at him, a man falling down drunk, and she hadn't seen a billionaire to be fleeced. She had seen the same monster that had almost crashed into her years ago. The same kind of monster that had succeeded in killing his wife and child. She wasn't protecting herself from him. In her own quiet, stubborn way, she had been trying to protect him from becoming the very thing that had destroyed his own life. The irony was so profound, so staggering, it felt like a physical blow. He had stood on the precipice of becoming the one thing he hated most in the world, and the only person who tried to pull him back was the waitress he had tried to ruin. He stared at the picture of Leo, at his bright, hopeful smile. This was the consequence. This boy's life was hanging in the balance, while he, Alistair Blackwood, was playing cruel games with blank checks. A wave of shame so powerful it made him dizzy washed over him. The grief he'd been drowning in felt different now, sharper, clearer, and mingled with a profound sense of self-loathing. He looked up at Gideon, who was waiting patiently by the door. "Get me Dr. Marcus Evans at the Mayo Clinic on the phone." Alistair said, his voice hoarse. "The head of pediatric cardiac surgery. Tell him it's Alistair Blackwood. Tell him it's an emergency." The 2 days following Clara's visit to the Blackwood Tower were the lowest of her life. The brief, empowering surge of defiance had evaporated, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of her situation. She had made her stand, but the mountain of medical debt remained. Leo was getting weaker. His school had called. He'd had a dizzy spell in history class and was resting in the nurse's office. Every phone call sent a spike of pure terror through her. She had spent 48 hours in a frantic haze of activity, applying for every job she could find: diner, waitress, coffee shop, barista, retail stocker. Her resume, once proudly featuring her position at one of Chicago's premier bars, now felt like a liability. Each application was a shot in the dark, and the silence that followed was deafening. The hope she'd clung to for so long was fraying into thin, brittle threads. She was sitting at her small kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills stamped with angry red letters past due. When her phone rang, it was an unknown number with a 507 area code. Rochester, Minnesota. The Mayo Clinic. Her heart leaped into her throat. Oh God, no. Not now. Please don't be bad news. With a trembling hand, she answered. Hello. Am I speaking with Ms. Clara Evans? The voice was warm and professional. Yes, this is she. Ms. Evans, my name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm the lead patient coordinator for Dr. Marcus Evans' surgical team at the Mayo Clinic. Clara's blood ran cold. Dr. Marcus Evans was a legend, the surgeon who had pioneered the very procedure Leo needed. They had been on his waiting list for months, buried under a mountain of higher priority cases that had funding. Is everything okay with Leo? Everything is more than okay, Miss Evans, the coordinator said, a hint of excitement in her voice. I'm calling with some rather extraordinary news. An anonymous benefactor has contacted the hospital. They have agreed to cover the full cost of Leo's treatment. The surgery, post-operative care, travel accommodations for you both here in Rochester. Everything. Clara couldn't speak. The words didn't compute. It was like being told the laws of physics had been suspended just for her. I don't understand. Anonymous benefactor, who... I'm sorry the donor has insisted on complete anonymity. All I can tell you is that the funds have been transferred and verified. Furthermore, Dr. Evans has personally reviewed Leo's case. He has an opening in his surgical schedule in 2 weeks. He believes Leo is an ideal candidate. We'd like to get him admitted as soon as possible to begin pre-operative workups. 2 weeks. It was a miracle. A lightning strike from a clear blue sky. Tears began to stream down Clara's face, hot and silent. The crushing weight that had been sitting on her chest for a year suddenly lifted. Leo was going to get his chance. Ms. Evans, are you still there? Yes, she choked out, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Oh my God, thank you. After she hung up, she sat in stunned silence. For a full 10 minutes, letting the reality of it wash over her. An anonymous benefactor. There was only one person she could think of with the means and the motive to do something so monumental. Alistair Blackwood. But why and why anonymously? It didn't fit the man she had met, the arrogant drunk, the cold-hearted CEO. This was an act of profound kindness, of life-altering grace. It made no sense. Just as her mind was starting to clear, her phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID read, Henderson, Omni Tower. Her stomach tightened into a knot. She almost declined the call, but morbid curiosity got the better of her. Hello. Clara. It's Robert Henderson. Her former manager's voice was slick with a desperate, oily charm she'd never heard before. How are you? I was just thinking about you. I'm sure you were, Robert, she said dryly. Listen, Clara, about the other night. A terrible misunderstanding. I was under enormous pressure, you understand. A high-value guest. Things were said in the heat of the moment that nobody meant. You fired me, Robert. That seemed pretty clear. "A temporary leave of absence," he insisted, his voice squeaking slightly. "And I have great news. I've been authorized to offer you your job back, and not just your old job, assistant manager. Full salary, benefits, the works. It's a fantastic opportunity." Clara was speechless. From fired to assistant manager in 2 days. Something was very wrong. "Authorized by who?" Henderson cleared his throat. "Well, that's the other bit of news. There's been a change in ownership. The Omni Hotel Group received an offer they couldn't refuse late yesterday. The entire property, including the Apex Bar, was acquired by a private holding company." "What holding company?" Clara asked, though she already knew the answer. "It's called, Blackwood Hospitality," Henderson mumbled. Alistair Blackwood had bought the entire hotel. The sheer breathtaking scale of his power was dizzying. He hadn't just gotten her fired. He now owned the very ground she was fired from. He had bought the building just to offer her a job. "Clara, are you there?" "What do you say?" Henderson pressed. "I'll think about it," she said, and hung up before he could reply. Her apartment suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in. She stood up and walked to the window, her mind reeling from the impossible events of the last hour. Leo was saved. Her old job upgraded and gift-wrapped was being handed to her. It was everything she had ever wanted, all delivered by the man she had defied. But it felt less like a victory, and more like being caught in an invisible web. He was rearranging her life from a distance, pulling strings she couldn't see. As she stared out at the street below, a black car turned the corner. It wasn't the Maybach. It was a sleek black Audi A8, equally imposing. It pulled to a stop directly in front of her building. Her phone vibrated in her hand. A new text message from an unknown number. It contained only 7 words. "My car is waiting downstairs. A.B." Clara stood by the window for a long moment, the text message glowing on her phone screen. Her first instinct was to say no, to ignore the summons, lock her door, and focus only on the miracle of Leo's surgery. She didn't owe Alistair Blackwood anything. His anonymous donation, as life-saving as it was, felt like another power play. A grand, sweeping gesture designed to indebt her to him, to prove that his money could solve any problem, even one of his own making. But then she thought about the blank check. She had returned it because she needed to face him to deliver her message in person. This felt like the other half of that conversation. He had responded not with anger, but with an act of impossible generosity. She owed it to herself, and maybe even to him, to understand why. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her coat and went downstairs. The same imposing driver from before stood by the rear door of the Audi. This time, when he saw her, he opened the door without a word, a silent acknowledgement that he had been expecting her. The interior of the car was a cocoon of plush leather and polished wood, silent and serene. "Where are we going?" she asked, as the car pulled smoothly into traffic. "The Lincoln Park Conservatory," the driver replied, his eyes on the road. The choice surprised her. Not his office tower, not a stuffy high-end restaurant, but a public garden, a place of life and quiet beauty. 20 minutes later they arrived. The driver escorted her to the entrance of the Palm House, a magnificent Victorian glass structure filled with towering palm trees and lush tropical foliage. The air inside was warm and humid, thick with the smell of damp earth and blooming flowers. It was a world away from the cold, sharp edges of the city. She saw him standing near a small, ornate fountain, his back to her. He was staring at a collection of vibrant, exotic orchids. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a simple cashmere sweater and trousers. Without the corporate armor, he looked older, more vulnerable. He must have heard her footsteps on the stone path, because he turned. His face was devoid of the arrogance from the bar and the coldness from his office. What she saw instead was a deep, weary sadness and a profound sense of shame. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice quiet. "Clara, thank you for coming. You bought a hotel and paid for my brother's surgery." "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, her voice steady. "It seemed like the least I could do." A faint, mirthless smile touched his lips. "Please, call me Alistair." He gestured to a stone bench near the fountain. "May we—" They sat in silence for a moment. The only sound, the gentle splash of water and the rustle of leaves. "I imagine you have questions," he finally said, looking at his hands. "One or two," she understated. "Why" seems to be the main one. Alistair took a long, slow breath. "What Gideon, my head of security, found in his report about you, about your brother, that was only part of it. He also found an old police report, a car accident you were in 5 years ago." Clara tensed. "It was nothing. A fender bender." "The other driver was drunk," Alistair stated, his voice flat. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were filled with a sun so raw it was startling. "The night you refused to serve me, it was the 10th anniversary of the death of my wife Eleanor and our daughter Lily." He paused, and in that pause Clara felt the entire dynamic between them shift. The ground crumbling to reveal a vast shared chasm of loss. They were driving home from Lily's piano recital. He continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. A man, an executive from a rival firm, celebrating a new contract, decided to drive home. He was 3 times over the legal limit. He crossed the center line on a rain-slicked road. They were killed instantly. He looked away towards the impossibly vibrant orchids, but Clara knew he wasn't seeing them. He was seeing something else entirely. "Every year, on that day, I fall apart. I try to find a place where the memories can't reach me. That night I chose your bar. I was trying to outrun their ghosts, and in the process I was turning myself into the very monster who took them from me. I was becoming him." He turned back to her, his gaze intense. "And you stopped me. You stood there with the weight of your own world on your shoulders, and you refused to let me complete that transformation. You had more reason than anyone to hate what I was becoming, yet you were the only one who tried to prevent it. You didn't do it out of judgment. You did it out of a deep human decency I thought no longer existed. The anonymous donation, the job offer, they weren't power plays. They were acts of penance." "The check," he said with a shake of his head, a look of self-disgust on his face. "That was the act of a coward, a broken man trying to use his power to lash out. When you brought it back, you held up a mirror to me, and I was horrified by what I saw. I didn't save your brother's life to indebt you to me. I did it because I had to. It was the only way I could start to balance the scales, to create something good in the wake of all the ugliness I had caused." They sat in silence again, but this time it was a comfortable, shared silence. The anger Clara had harbored towards him had dissolved, replaced by a profound, aching empathy. "I am so sorry for your loss, Alistair," she said softly, and she meant it. "And I," he replied, his voice cracking slightly, "am so sorry for what I put you through." He cleared his throat, regaining a sliver of his composure. "The job offer stands, though not as a manager at the apex. That was clumsy. I have a better idea. For years I've just been accumulating wealth. It's meaningless. I'm starting a foundation, the Eleanor and Lily Blackwood Foundation. Its mission will be twofold: to provide immediate financial aid to the families of children needing critical medical care, and to support victims of drunk driving incidents. He looked at her, a genuine, hopeful light in his eyes for the first time. I need someone to run it. Someone with unimpeachable integrity. Someone who understands the stakes. Someone who knows when to say no. I need you, Clara. Not as a waitress or a manager. As the director of the foundation. You would have full autonomy. The first project would be to find and fund 10 more families just like yours. The offer hung in the warm, humid air between them. It was more than a job. It was a purpose. It was a chance to turn her own pain and struggle into a force for good. The power he was offering her wasn't the power of money, but the power to help, to heal, to build. The blank check had been a test of her character. This was the reward. 6 months later, Clara stood behind a podium at the Chicago Cultural Center. A woman transformed. The relentless gray of her old life had been replaced by a quiet confidence. Today was the official launch of the Eleanor and Lily Blackwood Foundation, and the room was filled with doctors, journalists, and the first families who had benefited from its mission. In the front row, her brother, Leo, vibrant and healthy after his successful surgery, gave her a beaming thumbs up. Her heart swelled. Nearby, Alistair Blackwood watched from the side of the stage. The haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet sense of peace. He had found a way to channel his pain into purpose, remaining the silent, anonymous benefactor who had made all this possible. We are often told that everyone has a price, Clara said, her voice clear and strong. It's a cynical view, one that cheapens the human spirit. But I've learned that some things are priceless. A child's laughter, a second chance, an act of unexpected kindness. The most valuable things in this world are not what we can buy, but what we choose to give. Her relationship with Alistair had settled into a professional partnership, built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of loss. They were two broken people who, by a strange twist of fate, had helped each other become whole again. Later, after the applause, Alistair joined her and Leo. "You were magnificent, Clara," he said, his smile genuine. "Thank you, sir." Leo chimed in, his cheeks full of healthy color. "For everything. Your sister is the one who deserves the credit," Alistair replied, his gaze warm. He then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver frame. Inside was the blank check. "I keep this on my desk. A reminder." Clara looked at the check. The empty lines no longer seemed like a threat or a test, but a beginning. An empty space that had been filled not with a number, but with purpose. She had been offered a blank check, a chance to write her own price, and in the end, she had discovered her true worth was measured not in money, but in courage, integrity, and the quiet power of a human heart. That was a currency no billionaire could ever own. In the end, Clara and Alistair's story wasn't about a waitress and a billionaire. It was about two people who found redemption in the most unexpected way. Clara's single act of integrity didn't just save her own soul, it saved Alistair's too. It set in motion a chain of events that turned grief into grace and tragedy into hope for countless families. The blank check was never about the money. It was about the choice. What do we do when we have the power to write our own destiny? This story is a powerful reminder that our true value isn't in our bank accounts, but in our character. It's in the courage to say no, when it's easier to say yes, and in the compassion to help others even when we're hurting. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button to help it reach more people. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that good people still exist. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama that will inspire you. What would you have done with the check? Let us know in the comments below.